Guys, so when we worked with equation, our next progression was working with equations with two variables and then finally solving some systems of equations. So for inequalities, we are going to follow the same suit. So let's quickly work with a system of inequalities. And once again, system of inequalities or systems of inequalities are simply two inequalities put together, two or more inequalities put together that have the same solution to all of the variables. So let's start with 2x plus 5 has to be less than, let's say 10. And we're going to have negative 3x plus 6 has to be more than 12. I'm going to use the wiggly bracket to indicate that this is a system of inequalities. Now, we are going to follow exactly the same step to find the solution to that problem. But notice that we have two different signs, right? And pay attention to this because we are going to use the information provided by these signs to mark the solution on a number line if such exists. But let's start with some basic steps first. So let's solve the first inequality. So we have 2x plus 5 is less than 10. So I want to have x on its own. So first step I'm going to take is subtracting 5 from both sides, and we'll end up with 2x has to be less than 10. Now let's divide by 2 on both sides. So we're going to have x has to be less than 2. Okay, so that is the solution to the first inequality. Now, let's work on the second one. We have negative 3x plus 6 has to be greater than 12. Now, you see we have a negative sign in front of 3x, so we could either multiply by a negative sign, or we can move some things around. The choice is entirely yours. Personally, I like to multiply by the negative sign. So times negative 1, and I'm going to end up with positive 3x minus 6. Now, whenever we multiply by negative 1 or divide by negative 1, we have to flip the sign. And 12 times negative 1 is equal to negative 12. Okay, so let me add 6 to both sides. So it will be 3x on its own has to be less than negative 6. Now let's divide both sides by 3. Let me fix that 3 up real quick. And we have x has to be less than negative 6. Okay. So you see we get different answers for both inequalities, right? But since they are combined in a system, we have to find a solution that satisfies both. Now, if you learn pretty quickly and if you understand how you can combine these things in your head, then go ahead, you can write the answer right away. But I still recommend drawing things on a number line because that will allow us to find the answer that satisfies not only the first one, not only the second one, but both at the same time. So the way you do it, you write the answers on the number line. So we got negative 6 and 2. So in this case, right, both solutions have to be less than a number. So let's start with this one. Let's start with x has to be less than -6. Once again, our answer or our inequality does not involve an equal sign. So we're going to use an open circle and select everything that's less than -6. And that is the answer to the second inequality. Now, the answer to the first inequality states that x's have to be less than 1, than 2. So we're going to use, let me use a different color. Open circle, because we don't have an equal sign, and select everything less than 2. And mark it on a number line. Okay. Now, once again, this is a system of inequalities, so we need to find an answer that satisfies both inequalities. The only part of the solution on the number line that actually satisfies both inequalities is this part right here. You see how the red and black overlap? That means that this part is the solution to both the first one and the second inequality. So we can conclude that the solution to both, or the solution to the system of two inequalities, is between -infinity, okay, all of the numbers less than -6, all the way up to 6. And we are going to use parentheses here because, once again, we do not have equal sign in any of those inequalities. Notice how different the answers are, right? So once again, we have to pick a solution that satisfies both the first inequality and the second inequality, because they are combined into a system. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward because we did not have an equal sign involved in any of those inequalities. Now let's do a second example where we will have an equal sign involved. So I'm going to write x plus 3 has to be greater or equal than 9. And then we are going to have, let's say, 4x minus 8 has to be less than 2. Right, so let's find the answer to each one of those inequalities individually, and then we can combine it to find answer that satisfies the system, just like we did in the first example. So our step number 1, work on the first inequality. So because this one is very simple, I'm going to skip some steps and just subtract subtract 3 from both sides and write it out as a final number. So x has to be greater or equal to 9 minus 3 is 6. Okay, we got the first solution covered. Now second one is a little bit more difficult, but similarly I'm going to skip the first step of adding 8 to both sides. So we have 4x has to be less than 2 plus 8 is 10. Now let's divide both sides by 4 to have x on its own, and we end up with x less than 10 over 4 is 5 over 2. Okay, so we got both solutions. Now keep in mind, these solutions are only for each of the individual inequalities. Now to see if the system has a solution, let's write it on the number line. So first I'm going to select 6, and 5 over 2 is 2.5, or just 5 over 2. I'm going to write it as 5 over 2. I only say 2.5 because I want to place that on the number line in the correct spot. Okay, so in this case, all of the x's have to be less than, once again, open circle because we didn't have an equal sign, have to be less than 5/2. That's for the second one. For the first one, we have x greater or equal to 6. Now, equal to, right, or equal to involves a closed circle. And we want to select all the x's that are greater than that. So now we're going to move on to the right side. Okay, do you see if these answers are overlapping in any way? Not really, right? They do not overlap. So we can conclude that this system of equations does not have a solution, right? So it means that x belongs to an empty set. That's how you can write it out. Or you can simply use your words and write out that, oh, bless me. And you can simply write out that x belongs to an empty set, or there's no solution.